Not every horror story is born in imagination. Some are stitched together by police reports, survivor accounts, and whispers that never fade. Tonight, we're not stepping into fiction. We're walking straight into the shadows of real events. Moments when ordinary people met something they couldn't explain, something that left a mark far deeper than fear. The world hides places that look safe by day: vacation cabins, mountain paths, sleepy motels. But when night falls, they become thresholds to something else. There are stories that were never meant to be told, because when you hear them, you can't unhear them. What follows are 10 true stories. Each one happened to someone who, just like you, thought they were safe. No ghosts invented, no monsters imagined, just raw, unnerving truth. And tonight, we begin with a couple who thought they'd found a hidden gem on the edge of Oregon's coast. But what they really discovered was an airman that no longer existed. Today, we bring you 10 creepy true horror stories you'll wish were true. Let's start. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend escape. Aaron and Michael had been working nonstop for months. She was a nurse, he a freelance editor, and the plan was simple: rent a small cabin near the Oregon cliffs, disconnect from everything, and just breathe. The listing they found was perfect. The photos showed a cozy 2-story house surrounded by pine trees, fog curling around the roof like a postcard. The price was suspiciously low, but the host's reviews looked normal, at least on first glance. A few broken sentences, all short. Very peaceful. Nice area. Good stay. It didn't raise alarms. They booked it. The drive there was uneventful. Long stretches of mist, small towns that looked half asleep. When their GPS announced, "You've arrived," they saw nothing but trees. The house wasn't visible from the road. Michael drove slowly, headlights cutting through fog, until a narrow gravel path appeared between the trees. At the end of that path, the house stood waiting. It was exactly like the pictures. Same white paint, same porch swing, same cracked window pane near the door. But something felt off. The yard was overgrown, weeds curling over the steps, and the porch swing moved slightly in the wind, creaking like a faint whisper. Still, Erin laughed it off. "It's the coast," she said. "Everything rusts here." Inside, the air smelled faintly of sea salt and something else. Something stale, like damp clothes left too long. Dust floated in the shafts of afternoon light. The furniture looked exactly like the photos, except older, more decayed. A single framed picture hung crooked on the wall. A photo of a couple, blurred faces, standing in front of what looked like the same house. They unpacked, cooked pasta, and by dusk, fog had swallowed everything outside. The world beyond the porch vanished completely. When night came, Michael noticed something strange. The phone had no signal, not a single bar. Even Wi-Fi, which the host had promised, wouldn't connect. Maybe the router's in another room, he thought. But every door they checked led to empty bedrooms, all furnished but lifeless. The sheets looked untouched for years. At 10:47 p.m., Aaron heard footsteps upstairs. They froze. Michael whispered, "It's probably the old wood creaking." But the steps were rhythmic, slow, deliberate, heavy. Someone was walking back and forth above them. When they went to check, the second floor was empty. Dust on the floor showed no footprints. Then they noticed something worse. The framed photo downstairs, the one of the couple, was gone. They didn't remember touching it. Michael looked around, heart pounding. The frame lay flat on the table now, face down, glass cracked. When he lifted it, he saw that the photo had changed. It now showed the same couple, but behind them a shadow, tall, featureless. At that moment, something thudded in the kitchen. A heavy sound like a door slamming. They ran out, but every door was closed, every window still fogged. They decided to leave, grab their bags and go, no explanations. But when they reached the front door, the handle wouldn't turn. It wasn't locked, it simply wouldn't move, as if rusted solid. The air turned colder. The wind outside howled, and for the first time they both smelled it clearly: decay. a wet, rotting odor that seemed to seep from the walls. Upstairs, a door creaked open. They bolted for the back exit, slamming their shoulders into it until the lock snapped. They didn't stop running until the gravel road opened back to the main highway. When they looked back, the house was gone. Nothing but trees and fog. The next morning, Michael called Airbim to report the incident. The representative checked, paused, and said there was no record of that property ever being listed. No host under that name. No address registered. Weeks later, out of curiosity or denial, Michael returned to the area. The gravel path was still there. At the end of it, nothing. Just a patch of wild grass with a single half-buried mailbox. On it, faint letters spelled a last name, the same one that had appeared on their booking confirmation. They had stayed in a house that no longer existed. Maybe one that hadn't for years. If this story made your skin crawl, then our next one will chill you even deeper. Because if a house can vanish, what about the people who do? The Blue Ridge Mountains stretch for hundreds of miles across the eastern United States, rolling ridges, green valleys, and a silence that feels ancient. For many, they are a sanctuary of peace. For others, they've become a place where people disappear without a trace. The story of Evan Ward begins like any other hiking tale. A 29-year-old environmental photographer, he was known for venturing into remote trails to capture untouched beauty. His social media was filled with misty trees, abandoned cabins, and lonely sunrises. He had an eye for isolation. In the summer of 2016, Evan planned a solo trip through a stretch of forest near Asheville, North Carolina. It wasn't an unusual decision. He'd done harder trails before. But this time, his GPS tracker and messages stopped abruptly after his second day. What followed wasn't just a missing person case. It was something that still baffles local authorities to this day. Evan set off early one morning. Weather reports said clear skies, light wind. His last photo, uploaded at 8:12 a.m., showed the sun filtering through trees and the caption, "The silence here feels alive." That was the last anyone ever heard from him. When he didn't return, a search team was dispatched. Dogs, drones, volunteers, all combed through miles of dense forest. For days, they found nothing. No tent, no backpack, no clothing. But on the fourth day, a ranger spotted something near a creek. It was Evan's camera, half buried in mud. The memory card was still intact. The photos on it told a story more disturbing than anyone expected. The first few images were what you'd expect: trees, light patterns, moss-covered rocks. But as the sequence continued, the tone changed. In one, the forest was darker, as if a storm had rolled in, though no rain had fallen that day. In another, the frame tilted oddly, as if Evan had been running or turning suddenly. Then came a shot that froze investigators, a figure standing between the trees. It wasn't close enough to see detail, just a silhouette. Human-shaped, tall, thin, the kind of image that makes your brain struggle to define what it's seeing. The next photos came in rapid bursts. Trees, blurred motion, the same figure again, closer this time. Then one last image, completely black, except for a faint reflection in the bottom corner, like an eye-catching light. After that, nothing. The search team expanded their perimeter. 12 miles from the original trail, they found something strange. A circle of stones arranged perfectly as if someone, or something, had built it deliberately. Inside that circle lay Evan's boots, neatly placed side by side. Experts said it didn't make sense. No animal could do that, and no one could have carried his things so far without leaving tracks. Yet the earth around the stone circle was untouched. No footprints, no disturbed leaves, no sign of entry or exit. Weeks turned into months. Eventually, the case went cold. Then 3 months later, a camper named Laura May reported hearing something near her tent, miles from where Evan vanished. Around 2 a.m., she awoke to the sound of someone walking outside. Not running, not rushing, just slow, steady steps circling her tent. She froze, holding her breath, listening as the sound stopped right beside her. Then came a voice, hoarse, quiet, almost pleading. "Don't look." By morning, she packed and left the forest. She told rangers she didn't see who it was, but she would never forget the smell, earth, and decay, like wet leaves over something rotting. A week later, rangers checked the area. In the mud near her campsite, they found a single boot print. It matched Evan's size and tread pattern exactly. But here's the part that unsettled everyone the most. Evan's mother received a package 2 years later. No return address. Inside was a memory card. It contained 5 images, all taken deep in the Blue Ridge forest. The first showed a clearing with the same circle of stones. The second, a foggy ridge, the horizon distorted. The third, a decaying animal skull balanced on a branch. The fourth, a man's shadow stretched across a tree trunk, elongated unnaturally. And the last photo, just a close-up of Evan's old camera, half buried in mud again. No one knows who sent it. Digital experts confirmed the metadata. The pictures were taken with Evan's camera, but the date stamp showed something impossible, 2 years after his disappearance. People still hike those trails. Locals say if you go deep enough, your compass starts to spin, your phone battery drains in minutes, and you might hear footsteps packing behind you, always stopping when you turn. One ranger who worked the case said quietly that the forest keeps what it likes. That some people don't go missing in those woods, they just change. Evan's body was never found. But every year, someone posts a photo online from that region showing strange shapes among the trees, shadows too long, too human. And every time, the comments fill with the same message. It looks like he's still there. If this story left you staring into the dark corners of your room, brace yourself, because our next story doesn't take place in the wilderness at all. It happens somewhere that's supposed to be safe, warm, and secure. A small log cabin in northern Sweden, where a man discovered that solitude can turn into something much darker than silence. Northern Sweden is a place of endless silence. In winter, the forests stretch white for miles, the snow swallowing all sound. It's beautiful in daylight, but when darkness falls and the temperature drops below freezing, even the trees seem to hold their breath. That's where Henrik Olsen decided to spend his winter sabbatical. He was a novelist who'd recently lost both his parents within months of each other. The city noise, the condolences, the obligations, they'd all become too much. So he rented a small log cabin far north of Umeå, a place reachable only by snowmobile after December. He wanted peace, but peace is not always kind. The cabin was old but sturdy, built in the 1950s, surrounded by dense pine forest and an open stretch of frozen lake. The owner, an elderly woman from town, had warned him that winter nights could feel longer than they should. Henrik thought it was just a local superstition. He arrived in early January. The sun barely rose above the horizon that time of year, and when it did, it glowed weakly like a dying candle. The cabin had no neighbors, no visible lights anywhere nearby. The world was just snow, wood, and silence. For the first week, everything felt perfect. He read by the fire, cooked simple meals, wrote long journal entries. At night, he sat by the window watching the snow fall in absolute stillness. But soon, he noticed small things that didn't make sense. The first was the front door. Every morning, it was locked from the outside. Henrik always bolted it from within before bed, but when he woke up, the bolt was open, and the key was stuck in the outer side of the lock, as if someone had locked him in. He thought maybe he was tired, forgetful. He started leaving the key on the table instead of the lock. The next morning, the door was still locked from the outside, and the key was hanging there again. He tried to rationalize it, Maybe the door's mechanism was loose. Maybe it turned on its own. Then came the footprints. On the 8th morning, he noticed tracks in the snow. They began at the tree line and ended at his front door. The pattern was strange, long strides, uneven spacing, as if the person had been dragging one foot slightly behind. Henrik followed them, heart pounding. They led back into the trees and vanished halfway through the woods, as though whoever made them had simply stopped existing mid-step. That night the wind grew violent. Snow battered the windows and the cabin groaned under the storm. Henrik sat awake near the fire, every instinct screaming that something outside was moving, not the storm, something heavier. At 2:46 a.m. the sound came. A single knock on the door. He froze, then another knock, and another. Slow, steady, deliberate. He didn't move. The knocking stopped after a minute, replaced by faint scratching, like nails dragging lightly against wood. By morning, the storm had passed. The door remained closed, but near the handle, the wood was splintered, thin grooves clawed into the surface. He told himself it was an animal, a desperate fox maybe. But that illusion died the next night. At 3:11 a.m., the cabin's front door slammed open. Henrik jolted awake. His flashlight flickered as he stumbled into the main room. The door hung wide, snow sweeping in. Outside, nothing. No footprints, no wind, just absolute smothering quiet. He closed the door, barricaded it with a chair, and sat awake until dawn. When sunlight returned, weak and gray, he noticed something chilling. On the inside of the door, just above eye level, someone, or something, had etched 3 symbols into the wood. They looked like inverted triangles, crude but deliberate. He didn't recognize them. That was the day he decided to leave. He began packing, but the power went out. Then his phone battery drained from 60% to 0 in seconds. No reception, no explanation. The sun began to set before he finished packing. Darkness came early, faster than usual, as though the night was hurrying toward him. By 4 p.m., the cabin was pitch black except for the firelight. And then from somewhere deep inside the walls came a faint knocking, not from the door this time, but from behind the wood panels themselves. It moved, first behind the wall near the fireplace, then the hallway, then closer beneath the floorboards. Henrik backed away slowly. Then he remembered something the old owner had said when he rented the cabin. Don't try to open the cellar, it's sealed for a reason. He hadn't even realized the cabin had a cellar, but now, with the knocking echoing below, he saw it, a square outline beneath a rug near the kitchen table, a trapdoor he'd never noticed. The sound was coming from underneath it. He forced himself to lift a corner of the rug. The outline was clearer now, a wooden hatch with an iron ring for a handle. Cold air seeped through the edges. He knelt shaking, staring at it. The knocking stopped. And then from the other side, something knocked back, exactly 3 times. That broke him. He ran for the snowmobile, not even caring to pack. The engine sputtered in the freezing air but caught, and he sped through the forest path without looking back once. He didn't stop until he reached the main road. 2 days later, when police returned with him to investigate, they found the cabin door wide open again, the inside freezing cold, firewood untouched. The rug in the kitchen was gone, the hatch beneath it open. The stairs led down into blackness, and the smell that rose from below made everyone step back, metallic, damp, and old. They sealed the cabin permanently that winter. Locals say no one rented it since. Some nights when the wind is still, hikers claim they can hear knocking echoing across the frozen lake 3 times, slow and hollow. And for reasons no one understands, the lock on the cabin's front door is always found turned from the outside. If this story kept you watching the shadows, you might think being near the water would feel safer. Open air, endless ice, nowhere to hide. But what happens when the ice itself begins to whisper? Because our next story takes us to Alaska, where a research team found something trapped beneath a frozen lake, something that should never have been disturbed. Winter in Alaska doesn't feel like a season, it feels like another world. For months, daylight shrinks to a pale blur, and the land turns to glass and silence. Beneath that silence lies something vast, ancient, and waiting. In 2003, a small research team from Anchorage University traveled to the remote interior, an isolated area near Lake Mirov, hundreds of miles from any major settlement. Their project was simple: drill deep into the frozen lake to study methane levels trapped beneath the ice. The team consisted of 5 people, scientists, experienced, rational minds. They brought advanced drilling equipment, cameras, and enough supplies for 2 weeks. Their base camp was a temporary cabin set up near the frozen shoreline. The first days went smoothly. They drilled 3 sample holes, recorded gas readings, and noted the usual sub-zero conditions. Everything seemed ordinary until the 4th night. At 1:12 a.m., one of the recorders, a geologist named Riley Kearns, woke up to a sound that shouldn't have existed in that place. It was faint at first, muffled, rhythmic, like tapping. She thought it was ice shifting, but as she listened, she realized it wasn't random, it had pattern. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. By morning, she told the others. They brushed it off as ice expansion, common in subglacial lakes. But that day, when they checked one of their drill sites, they found something odd. The ice around the hole was cracked, not outward from pressure, but inward, as if something below had pushed against it. They measured the pressure again, normal. The sonar, however, picked up something strange. A faint, moving echo beneath the ice about 40 feet down. It wasn't gas, wasn't seismic. It almost resembled movement. They joked it was a frozen fish with attitude. But that night, the sounds came again, this time louder, clearer, closer. The camp recorder captured it. Faint knocks at first, then something new, voices. Distorted by layers of ice, distant and hollow, they sounded like whispers underwater. Words couldn't be made out, but the cadence was unmistakably human. The next morning, they checked the drill holes again. One had frozen over, but something was trapped just beneath the surface. What looked like air bubbles, except they weren't rising. They were shaped wrong. Tiny outlines, like human fingers pressed against the ice from below. They cut the section out to study it, but within minutes of exposure to air, the shapes melted away completely. That night, the whispers became louder. The wind outside died completely, leaving the sound clearer. It wasn't random now. It sounded like multiple voices speaking at once, overlapping, murmuring, gasping. One of the team members, a technician named Evan, insisted it was low-frequency interference from their own equipment. He turned everything off to prove it. The whispers kept going. By day 6, Riley's journal entries had changed tone. She wrote about pressure headaches, about dreams of people walking beneath the ice. She also wrote one line that later investigators would underline. "They're trying to come up." On the 7th night, their cameras caught something. A motion sensor near the drilling site activated at 2:37 a.m. The footage was grainy, but it showed a ripple moving across the frozen surface of the lake, slow, deliberate, almost like a figure crawling beneath the ice. Evan went out to check. Minutes later, the rest of the team heard a scream cut short. When they ran outside, his flashlight lay 10 meters from the hole, its beam shaking faintly over cracked ice. They found no footprints, no blood, just his parka folded neatly near the hole, as if someone had undressed him before pulling him down. They radioed for emergency extraction immediately, but weather conditions grounded rescue helicopters for 2 more days. During that time, the remaining 4 barricaded themselves inside the cabin, terrified to even approach the lake. On the 2nd night, the knocking began again, this time against the walls of the cabin itself. The same pattern, 3 slow knocks. It echoed from one side of the building to the next, as though circling them. Then came the voice. Faint, familiar. It was Evans. He was whispering their names, one by one. They didn't open the door. By morning, one of the team members had vanished. Her sleeping bag was empty, unzipped, the zipper frozen mid-track. The door was still bolted from inside. The 3 remaining survivors, Riley, Dr. Hughes, and the lead engineer, were rescued 2 days later, frostbitten and incoherent. Riley was the only one who could speak coherently at first. Her statement to the investigators was brief. They're under there, they're not gone, the ice remembers. The footage and audio they recovered from the cabin's recorder were eventually classified. But in 2011, a short 27-second clip leaked online before being removed. The clip begins with static, then faint tapping, then through distortion, a woman's voice whispering, "Help me out," followed by silence and a low cracking sound. Experts later said the voice did not match any of the 3 survivors. Lake Mirov was permanently closed to researchers the following year. Local pilots report that when flying over it in winter, the ice sometimes appears black, not because of depth, but because something darker than water seems to move beneath it. A recent satellite image taken in 2019 showed a large fissure running straight across the lake's surface. Around that fissure, 5 distinct circular patches of ice, like something pressing upward. No one's gone back since. And maybe that's for the best. Because sometimes, what's buried in the cold doesn't want to stay forgotten. It just waits for the thaw. If this story made you fear what lies beneath, wait until you hear what can happen when something sits beside you. Because our next story isn't about isolation or distance. It's about a crowded train in Poland, where one passenger realized too late that not everyone aboard was alive. It was just past midnight when the last train pulled out of the city. The platform was nearly empty, a lone vending machine humming in the corner, flickering lights overhead, and a chill that clung to the air like fog. Amir boarded the train with heavy eyes and a heavier mind. He had just finished a long business trip, desperate to reach home before dawn. The train car he entered was dimly lit, almost empty except for a woman sitting near the end, her face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He chose a seat across the aisle, close enough to feel less alone, far enough to respect the silence. The train began to move, rattling through the darkness. Outside, the city lights faded into black fields and sleeping towns. At first, everything was normal, the rhythmic clatter of wheels, the occasional voice from another car. But after a few minutes, Amir noticed something strange. The lights in the carriage behind him were off, completely off. No sound, no movement, just black glass reflecting his own confused face. He turned his gaze back to the woman. She was sitting perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. Yet there was something unnatural about her stillness. No subtle rise or fall of breathing, no shift, no sound of fabric, just silence. Then, as the train swayed around a curve, she tilted her head slightly, slowly, as if acknowledging that she knew he was watching. Amir looked away quickly, pretending to check his phone. No signal. The screen reflected her shape faintly, still turned toward him. The announcement system crackled overhead. Next stop, Roswell Station. But Amir frowned. He'd taken this route dozens of times. There was no Roswell Station. The train slowed, brakes screeching against metal. Through the window, he saw nothing, no platform, no people, just fog rolling across a field. Then the doors opened with a hiss. The woman stood. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she were remembering how to move. She turned toward him, and for the first time, he saw her face. It wasn't a face. It was absence. A pale blur like fog trapped beneath skin, eyes hollow and mouth stretched into something that might once have been human. She stepped off the train and vanished into the mist. Amir sat frozen. The doors stayed open for several seconds longer than usual. Then the voice returned. "Next stop, Homewood." The doors closed. The train began to move again. Amir tried to calm himself. Maybe he'd fallen asleep. Maybe this was just a dream. But then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were now more passengers on the train. Silent figures seated all around him, dressed in outdated clothes, men in hats, women with lace gloves, children holding old toys. None of them moved. None of them blinked. He pressed the emergency button. No response. The lights flickered. For a second, he saw his reflection in the glass, surrounded by rows of pale, empty faces. Then just as suddenly, the train screeched to a halt again. This time, the sign above the door read "Terminal Stop." Amir didn't wait. He grabbed his bag and ran toward the front carriage, but every door he passed showed the same thing. Passengers sitting motionless, faces blurred, eyes black with nothingness. When he finally reached the conductor's cabin, it was empty. Only a small, old-fashioned ticket lay on the seat, yellowed, fragile, and stamped with a date that made no sense. October 5, 1974. That was 50 years ago. The lights went out. The sound of the wheels faded. The train had stopped. And in the reflection of the cabin window, Amir saw someone standing behind him. A woman with a wide-brimmed hat and a faint, knowing smile. They say that train still runs on certain nights, a route that appears on no map, carrying passengers who never got off. Some say if you ever board the midnight line and hear the announcement for Roswell Station, you should never look up. Because if you do, you might just realize you're not a passenger. You're the next edition. If this story made you uneasy, brace yourself. Because our next story takes us off the tracks and deep into the woods, where one missing camper's final discovery was never meant to be found in the cabin in the pines. The trail had long since disappeared behind them. The forest stretched endlessly, whispering with the wind, its tall pines swaying like ancient sentinels guarding something they couldn't see. Maya, a photographer chasing silence after a painful breakup, had driven into the northern woods to spend a week alone in a rented cabin. The online listing promised solitude, a peaceful retreat surrounded by untouched nature. By the time she arrived, the sun was already dipping below the tree line. The last sliver of gold faded into a wash of gray, and with it came an uneasy stillness. The cabin stood at the edge of a clearing, its wooden panels warped with age, its windows fogged from within. The air smelled of damp earth and pine resin. Inside, the cabin was sparse. A single bed, a table, a small wood stove, and walls lined with old photographs. Most of the photos were black and white, showing the forest as it might have looked decades ago. In one, a group of campers smiled in front of the same cabin. Their eyes, however, seemed strange, off focus, almost afraid. Maya brushed it off as her imagination. She unpacked her gear, set up her camera, and decided to take a few sunset shots before the light vanished. But when she stepped back outside, the forest had already grown darker than it should have. She took one photo, the cabin framed by the trees, and the flash briefly illuminated something to the left, a figure standing between the pines. It was there for less than a second. When she blinked, it was gone. The camera screen showed nothing but trees, yet she could have sworn. That night, the wind howled through the branches like voices caught in motion. Maya tried to sleep, but every time she drifted off, she heard faint tapping on the wooden walls. Once, twice, then silence. She told herself it was just the forest settling. But when she awoke just before dawn, her camera, the one she had left on the table, was gone. The cabin door was still locked from the inside. Her heart began to race. She stepped out barefoot into the frosty morning mist, calling out into the trees. No answer, just the creaking of trunks as if the forest itself was listening. And then she saw it. Her camera was lying on the forest floor a few meters away, half buried in pine needles, lens cracked, as if it had been dropped from a height. She picked it up and checked the photos. There were 12 new images. She hadn't taken them. The first few were random: the edge of the bed, the window, the door. But then the angles changed. They looked like they were taken from above her while she slept. In one, she could see her own hand hanging off the bed. In another, her face, mouth slightly open, eyes closed, and just behind her, near the wall, a dark blur that wasn't part of the cabin. Her stomach turned cold. The last image showed her standing in the clearing, holding the camera, except she hadn't taken any picture like that. The trees behind her formed a strange pattern, their shadows twisting into something that looked like symbols. She deleted the images and decided to leave, but the forest had other plans. The path back to her car was gone. Every direction she walked led her deeper into the pines. She marked trees with scratches, but when she looped back an hour later, the same marks were on different trunks, as if the forest was rearranging itself. By evening, fog had rolled in thick as smoke. The cabin reappeared before her, but she could have sworn she'd walked away from it hours ago. Its door stood open now, swaying with the wind. Inside, the light from the lantern flickered. Someone had lit it. Her first instinct was to run, but exhaustion overpowered fear. She stepped inside. The air was colder than outside. Every breath formed a cloud. The walls were bare now, the old photographs gone. On the table lay a single photograph, printed freshly on glossy paper. It was of her, taken that morning asleep in the bed. But behind her stood a man. Tall, wearing old camping clothes, face obscured by a shadow. She turned and froze. In the corner of the room, a wet boot print led toward the door. It was recent. She could still see drops of melted frost forming a small puddle. She backed away slowly, reaching for her phone. Still no signal. The door slammed shut. She ran to the window and tried to break it, but the glass wouldn't crack. Then, from outside, came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. She turned off the lantern and hid behind the bed, trembling. The footsteps stopped by the door. A long pause, then tapping. 3 soft taps, the same rhythm she'd heard the night before. She covered her mouth, her pulse roaring in her ears. The tapping stopped. Silence stretched so long that she began to believe he was gone until she heard a new sound. Clicking. The camera shutter. Right behind her. She turned, but the darkness swallowed everything. The flash blinded her for a split second, revealing a face inches from hers, pale, empty-eyed, a grin frozen into decay. When her vision cleared, the cabin was empty again. Her camera lay on the bed, still warm from use. Maya didn't sleep that night. When morning came, she stepped outside to leave, and finally found her car parked just beyond the clearing, as if it had never been missing. She drove until the trees thinned and the road reappeared. Days later, she developed the photos again, hopping to prove it was all imagination. But the images were different now. They no longer showed her. Each one showed the cabin, viewed from deep within the trees, as though someone else had been watching her leave. And in the last photo, the window of the cabin reflected a figure standing inside. It wasn't her. No one knows what really happened that week. Locals say the cabin has stood empty for decades. They claim it was once used as a ranger outpost, until a group vanished there in 1979, leaving only their cameras behind. Every few years, hikers find the cabin again, unchanged, always stocked with the same lantern, the same bed, the same photographs on the wall. And if you stay long enough, they say you'll hear that slow, patient tapping, someone still waiting for company in the dark heart of the pines. If this story left you uneasy, hold your breath, because our next tale will take you somewhere far colder, a place where silence itself hunts you. The cold came first, not as a feeling but as a sound. A deep hum in the frozen wind that seemed to vibrate through bone and breath. Dr. Helena Knorr had learned long ago that the Arctic didn't whisper, It listened. She had been stationed at Outpost Epsilon, a research facility buried beneath 30 feet of ice, for 5 months when the first anomaly appeared. The outpost was built in the 1980s, a labyrinth of narrow steel tunnels and flickering lights, surrounded by endless white. The sun hadn't risen in weeks. Helena was part of a small research team studying glacial acoustics, how the ice sang when it moved. It was supposed to be routine data collection, but the recordings had begun changing. At first, it was just distortion, low-frequency rumbling beneath the glacier's natural groans. Then came patterns, repeated pulses, measured rhythms, almost like breathing. One night, while analyzing the day's audio logs, Helena noticed something she couldn't explain. Between the usual seismic data, a faint voice, impossible, yet undeniable, whispered through the static. Below. She replayed it dozens of times, adjusting filters, convinced it was interference. But the word remained, buried in the deep frequencies like a warning from under the world. By morning, she was the only one left awake in the lab. The others were asleep in their bunks, and the station hummed with its usual low mechanical life. The generators, the water pumps, the endless rhythm of machines keeping them alive. Then came the tremor. It was small, but enough to rattle the lights and make frost fall from the ceiling. A few instruments blinked red. One of the seismic monitors showed movement deep below the station, something massive shifting far beneath the ice. Helena and the others suited up and followed the underground tunnel that led to the outer observation dome, a reinforced glass structure buried halfway inside the glacier. The air was colder there, sharp and metallic. Frost formed halos around their breaths. The ice outside was no longer still. It pulsed faintly as if something beneath it was moving, slow and alive. A shape formed in the distance, long, dark, impossibly large. Then the lights flickered. And for a brief moment, all of them heard it, a low moan from beneath the ice. Not geological, not mechanical, something living. The team panicked. They retreated to the main station, but the power began to fail. Communication lines went dead. The surface antenna froze solid. They were cut off completely. Helena tried to contact base camp via emergency radio, but only static answered until the static shifted. The same whisper came again, louder this time. Below. She froze. The others didn't hear it, only her. Over the next 3 days, the temperature inside the outpost began to drop even with the heating systems running. Pipes froze, supplies dwindled, and at night, something scraped along the metal walls, a deep dragging sound that echoed through the ventilation shafts. The scraping always came from below. Helena checked the maintenance logs and discovered something strange. Beneath Outpost Epsilon, there was supposed to be only solid ice. Yet the schematics showed an older structure directly beneath them, sealed off decades ago. An annex labeled only as Station Zero. The official records didn't mention it. No one knew who had built it or why it was sealed. But the more Helena studied the blueprints, the clearer it became. The new station had been built on top of the old one, as if burying it. That night she followed the sound, alone. The lower corridors were narrow and dark, the metal walls sweating with condensation. Her flashlight beam cut through the frost like a blade. The deeper she went, the colder it got, until her breath crystallized in front of her like tiny ghosts. She found the hatch hidden behind a maintenance panel. It had been welded shut, but over time the ice had cracked the seal. Inside was a ladder descending into blackness. The smell hit her first, old, stale air mixed with something like rust and decay. She climbed down. Station Zero wasn't on any map. Its walls were covered in frostbitten panels, its floors slick with thin ice. It felt less like a lab and more like a tomb. Tables lay overturned, papers frozen in place mid-motion. Whatever had happened down there, it had been sudden. In the center of the main chamber was a hole in the floor, perfectly circular, deep. The edges were lined with black ice, as though the metal had melted and refrozen. Helena leaned closer. Warm air drifted upward. She could hear the faint rhythm again, the same one from the recordings. A heartbeat. When she shone her flashlight down, the beam vanished into darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. Then something breathed back. A gust of air, wet and warm, rushed past her face. The walls trembled. The sound grew louder, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated in her chest. She stumbled backward, but before she could climb up, she saw movement in the dark below, shapes pressing against the ice, hands, dozens of them, pale and half-formed, clawing upward. She scrambled up the ladder, heart hammering, but the whisper followed her, threading through the metal walls like a living current. Below. When she burst back into the main corridor, frost was spreading fast across the walls. The other researchers were gone. Their bunks were empty, the doors left open, frost creeping along the floors like veins. The hum of the generators grew louder, wrong somehow, distorted, until it became a sound like breathing again. The station's lights turned red, emergency alarms flashing in a pattern she didn't recognize. She made her way toward the exit chamber, but the outer door was sealed under ice. Through the small window, she saw the snow outside shifting, bulging upward as if something enormous was trying to break through from below. The last log on her recorder was fragmented, her voice trembling. Whatever's beneath this station, it isn't frozen. The ice isn't solid, it's skin, layers of it. We've been drilling into something alive. No one ever recovered her or the rest of the team. When rescue crews arrived weeks later, Outpost Epsilon was gone, swallowed beneath a collapsed glacier. The only thing found was a single audio tape buried in the snow. On the recording under the static was a faint sound, a slow, rhythmic beat, and a whisper that rose just before the tape ended. Still below. They say that on certain nights, when the Arctic winds howl through the frozen plains, the ground hums faintly, a pulse from something far beneath. And if you listen closely, you might hear the station still alive under the ice, lights flickering, a heartbeat waiting to be heard again. If this story chilled your bones, brace yourself, because the next one will take you even deeper. A place where warmth turns to madness and survival itself becomes the horror. The road to nowhere begins in silence. No towns, no signs, no sound but the steady hum of tires gliding over cracked asphalt and the faint whisper of sand brushing across stone. It's the kind of silence that doesn't just surround you, it lives, it breathes, it remembers. For Adrian Malik, that road was supposed to be a shortcut. A 2-day drive through the western desert to reach Los Solas, a remote excavation site. He had left before sunrise, armed with nothing more than a map, a box of supplies, and the illusion that solitude was freedom. By noon, the highway stretched into infinity, a ribbon of tar melting beneath the punishing sun. The sky was too vast, the light too sharp, and the horizon shimmered as if the world ahead were only pretending to exist. Hours passed without a single car. The radio had long dissolved into static. Even the wind seemed to have stopped moving. The map claimed there was a town up ahead, Ridgefield, a small settlement with gas and a diner. But as the day bled into orange twilight, the land remained empty. No lights, no roofs, just the endless ache of the desert. Then, without warning, a sign appeared from the haze, its edges rusted, its letters trembling in the heat. Sundown Motel vacancy. The arrow pointed toward a dirt road curling into the dark. He slowed down. His fuel gauge trembled near empty. The air felt heavier here, the color of the sky turning from amber to bruised purple. Against every rational thought, he turned off the highway. The motel appeared like a mirage pulled from memory, a cluster of pale yellow cabins sitting in a shallow basin of sand. A neon sign buzzed weakly above the office door, flickering between life and death. The air smelled faintly of electricity, ozone, and something sweet like rain that never came. The parking lot was empty. Not a sound, not a bird, not even the chirp of an insect. Inside the office, time had stopped. A rotary phone sat beside a dusty register. A ceiling fan hung motionless in the stale air. The desk bell waited in silence. Adrian tapped it once. The sound rang far too long, echoing down unseen hallways, bouncing off walls that felt too close together. When the echo finally faded, the counter was no longer empty. A key rested there, old brass, number 9 etched into the tag. He hadn't seen anyone enter. The air hadn't shifted, yet somehow the key was waiting for him. Room 9 sat at the far end of the row. Its door opened with the slow, tired sigh of something disturbed from sleep. Inside, the room looked clean, too clean. The bed was perfectly made, the curtains drawn tight. A clock on the wall ticked faintly, but its hands refused to move. He placed his bag on the chair and lay back on the bed, letting exhaustion take him. That was when the hum began. At first it was faint, a deep, throbbing vibration that pulsed beneath the floorboards. It grew stronger, steady as a heartbeat, vibrating up through the frame of the bed until it pressed against his bones. It wasn't mechanical, it was organic. He pressed his ear to the floor. The sound deepened, layered with a rhythm that wasn't quite human, a pattern too deliberate to be random, too alive to be harmless. When he lifted his head, the lamp had turned off. The clock on the wall ticked again, its hands now moving backward. On the bedside table, where there had been nothing before, a photograph now sat in a tarnished silver frame. A family stood in front of the sundown motel, father, mother, 2 children. Their faces were pale, their smiles thin. The image looked decades old, but it was the eyes that caught him. The eyes were blurred, streaked mid-motion, as if they had been caught turning toward something behind them. On the back of the photograph, written in fading ink, was a date. Checked in 1972. He set it down carefully. That was when the hum stopped all at once, replaced by a faint hiss, a static whisper creeping through the walls. Somewhere a radio was playing. The sound was distorted, the melody distant and hollow. A woman's voice rose from the static, soft and slow, singing a tune about coming home. When he opened the door, the night had changed. Every window in the row of cabins glowed faintly yellow. Behind the curtains, shapes moved, human shapes, packing, sitting, standing at attention. No faces, no motion beyond the repetitive, mechanical kind of movement that comes from something remembering being alive. The motel's sign flickered overhead, casting short bursts of light across the sand. In those flashes, he thought he saw them, figures standing just beyond the parking lot, watching. Every time the sign blinked off, the figures seemed to step closer. He turned back toward the office. The radio was louder now. Inside, the guest book lay open on the counter. A new name had been written on the last line, ink still wet. Adrian Malik, room 9. The pen was resting beside it. Outside, the desert was gone. In its place stretched a flat, colorless expanse, black sand under a sky without stars. The world had folded into a void. The only light that remained came from the sundown motel's dying sign. And the sign was whispering. The light flickered in pulses, and between each pulse, faint letters formed within the glow: stay, stay, stay. The whisper grew louder, now joined by the hum returning from the ground beneath him. The motel itself seemed to vibrate with it. He stumbled to his car, but the tires had sunk deep into the sand. The ignition clicked uselessly. The rearview mirror caught something, a brief flicker of a pale face sitting in the back seat, half-rotted and grinning. When he turned, the seat was empty. He ran. The air around him thickened, heavy with invisible weight. Each breath tasted like metal and dust. The ground gave way beneath his boots, soft and shifting like wet ash. The neon glow behind him faded as the sand swallowed his footsteps. The hum grew louder until it was everywhere, inside his head, his chest, his pulse. It wasn't just vibration anymore. It was sound, forming the rhythm of 1,000 heartbeats beating out of sync. He stumbled, fell, and the sand opened like a mouth. In the split second before it closed, he turned. The motel's lights flared once, all the windows glowing bright at the same time. Dozens of silhouettes stood behind the glass pressed against it, hands raised, faces pale and empty. The sign flickered violently, its last burst of light painting the words across the darkness one final time. "Stay forever." Then it was gone. The desert reclaimed its silence. Days later, a truck driver passing through the empty stretch of road reported seeing a faint orange glow far out on the horizon. He described it as a flickering sign, half buried in sand. When search crews arrived, there was nothing, no motel, no road, no sign that anything human had ever been there. But they did find something, a single brass key half buried in the dunes. Its tag was etched with the number 9. The key was still warm. Locals tell stories of the Sundown Motel, a place that appears only to those who are lost between destinations. Travelers who drive too long into the dark, chasing sleep or silence. For them, the motel appears as a refuge, its rooms clean, its lights soft. But it is never shelter. Because the Sundown Motel doesn't serve the living. It waits for the forgotten, the ones who vanish on empty highways, swallowed by miles of dust and time. They say if you listen closely while driving through the desert at night, you can hear it, the faint hum beneath your tires, the rhythm of something moving deep underground. And sometimes in the distance, a light flickers once. Just one sign glowing faintly through the dark. Sundown Motel vacancy. If you ever see it, don't stop. Don't look, keep driving. Because the rooms are always ready, the lights are always waiting. And the guest book always has one more empty line. They say there are towns that don't exist on any map, places erased by time, abandoned, forgotten, or never meant to be remembered at all. But sometimes, if you drive far enough and take the wrong turn, you'll find them waiting, like something that refused to die. The name Ashcroft hadn't been spoken in decades. It wasn't on GPS, not in archives, not even in the old railway logs. The last record of it was a black and white photo from the 1940s, a mining settlement nestled between two cliffs, its streets half swallowed by dust. And then silence. No mention, no closure, just disappearance. For Lena Hart, Ashcroft was supposed to be a curiosity, a forgotten town to document for her urban exploration blog, a weekend project, something thrilling to chase after months of monotony. She had spent nights tracing rumors on internet forums, stories of people who'd stumbled upon an old town deep in the western canyons, where the wind didn't blow and clocks refused to tick. No one ever posted pictures. They just stopped replying. Her journey began like any other adventure. A rented Jeep, a camera, and the restless hunger to uncover what others couldn't. The drive through the canyons was silent except for the rumble of gravel under the tires. The road narrowed, winding through a land so empty it felt outside of time. She passed old signs half buried in sand, weathered boards that once bore names now erased by wind and sun. Then she saw it. A rusted metal arch jutting from the rock, letters barely legible beneath the grime. Welcome to Ashcroft, population 241. Only the one was still visible. Beyond the arch stretched a single road lined with wooden buildings, a gas station, a diner, a church with its steeple bent like a crooked finger, everything coated in decades of dust. But what froze her wasn't the decay, it was the absence of ruin. No cracks, no collapse, no signs of time's touch. The buildings looked preserved, as though everyone had left in a single moment and the air itself had hardened to keep it that way. Lena stepped out, camera in hand. The silence was suffocating. Even the wind refused to move through Ashcroft. The sound of her boots on the ground was the only proof she hadn't gone deaf. The diner door creaked open at her touch. Inside, everything sat untouched, plates still on tables, a jukebox in the corner, a cup of coffee fossilized mid-sip. A single fly lay dead on the counter, its wings fused to the surface by age. The cash register still held bills crisp as new. She turned the camera on and filmed slowly, narrating in a whisper she didn't mean to make. Every instinct told her not to, but the deeper she went, the more it felt like the town was listening. She crossed the street toward the church. Its doors stood ajar. Inside, pews faced an altar draped in dust-thick cloth. Beneath it, a single open Bible, pages blank except for one, where a line had been scrawled in jagged ink. They never left. The words were smeared, as if written by trembling hands. She backed away, nearly tripping over something on the floor, a child's toy, a small wooden horse with its head missing. It looked recently carved. Outside, the sky had shifted. The sun sat lower than it should have. Time seemed wrong here, as if hours passed differently, folding in on themselves. Lena returned to her car. The dashboard clock blinked nonsense, symbols instead of numbers. She tried to start the engine. Nothing, not even a click. Then faintly, the sound began. A bell. It echoed from the church tower, ringing slow and deliberate, though no wind stirred the rope. Each chime carried across the valley, and with it, the air seemed to thicken. She looked toward the main street. Lights were on. Soft, warm, flickering light glowed from the windows of every building. In the diner, silhouettes now moved, faint shapes sitting at tables, heads bowed. In the general store, figures shifted behind fogged glass, too distorted to name. And in the church doorway, someone stood, tall, still, watching. Lena's camera hung at her side, lens aimed toward the ground. She couldn't make herself lift it. A wave of pressure rolled through the air, low and steady, like the world inhaling. The figure in the church moved forward. She stumbled back, tripping over the curb, her breath loud in her ears. When she looked again, the street was empty, but something had changed. The lights no longer flickered, they pulsed, faintly, in rhythm. A slow, synchronized heartbeat that rippled through the town. She ran to her car, slammed the door, and turned the key until her wrist ached. The engine coughed once, then again, and started. Relief flooded her chest, sharp and temporary. She drove. The headlights carved through the dust, the arch receding behind her. For a moment she thought she was free, but the further she went, the more the road repeated itself, the same turn, the same bend, the same shape of cliff looming to her left. The odometer climbed, yet the scenery didn't change. After the 7th curve, she saw the arch again. Welcome to Ashcroft, population 241. Only now the number 2 was visible. Her hands shook. The air inside the car had gone cold, the breath fogging her windshield from the inside. She wiped it clean, but fingerprints appeared where she hadn't touched, long, narrow streaks sliding slowly down the glass. She hit the gas. The Jeep sped forward, engine roaring, dust flying. The town blurred, melted into motion, but when she blinked, it was ahead again. The road bent back into itself, looping like a maze with invisible walls. And then the lights went out. Everything vanished into black. For a second, she thought the headlights had died. Then the darkness moved, swallowing the road, the cliffs, the car. She heard the bell again, much closer now, reverberating through her skull. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't driving anymore. The Jeep sat in the middle of Ashcroft's main street. The diner lights burned once more, but dimmer now, as if drained. The figures inside stood motionless, heads tilted toward her. The church bell rang a final time and stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of breathing that wasn't hers. Lena clutched the camera, shaking, and turned it on. The screen flickered, then showed something impossible. Her reflection standing in the middle of the street, but behind her, dozens of shapes closing in. Their faces pale, hollow-eyed, lips moving in soundless prayer. She spun around. Nothing, just us swirling lazily in the air. Then the static started faint at first, rising into a whisper, words buried in the noise. Stay with us." Her knees buckled. She dropped the camera. The last thing the lens captured before it hit the ground was a row of figures emerging from the diner, walking slowly, deliberately, toward her, each one identical to the next. The recording ended there. Weeks later, hikers stumbled upon her Jeep at the base of the cliffs, engine off, keys still in the ignition. The interior was coated in dust, as though it had been sitting there for decades. On the passenger seat lay her camera. The battery was full, but the footage ended abruptly, the final frame frozen on a single image. The arch. Only now the sign read, "Welcome to Ashcroft, population 242. And in the distance, faint through the static of the recording, a bell began to ring again. They say if you ever drive through the canyon at night, you might see lights flicker in the distance, a town glowing faintly through the dust, a promise of shelter after miles of emptiness. But no matter how far you walk, you'll never reach it, because Ashcroft isn't a town anymore. It's a graveyard that remembers what it was. A place that collects the lost, the curious, the ones who don't know when to turn back. And once it finds you, it keeps you, adds your name, your face, your story to its streets. So if the road ever bends toward a valley that isn't on any map, and a sign greets you from the dark, whispering of home, keep driving, because some towns don't exist for the living. They wait for the ones who are already gone. If this story made you uneasy about where your next road trip might lead, don't close your eyes yet, because our next and final story takes us somewhere worse than the desert, the motel, or the town. It's not a place on any map. It's a place buried inside us all. It was the kind of desert road that made people vanish, a stretch of cracked asphalt running endlessly between Phoenix and the ghost towns of northern Arizona. The sun had already drowned behind the red cliffs, and the night was swallowing the sky when Daniel finally saw the flickering neon sign. Silver Star Motel, vacancy. He hadn't planned to stop, but after 6 hours behind the wheel, fatigue pressed heavy on his eyelids, and that one broken sign looked like salvation. The motel sat just off the road, its parking lot half buried in sand, the air humming with the faint buzz of the desert insects. The office door creaked open as Daniel stepped inside. A woman sat behind the counter, pale, her face half lit by a single bulb. She didn't greet him. She simply slid a key across the counter. Room 9. He paid in cash. She never asked for ID. When Daniel stepped outside again, the wind had gone still. The desert was quiet, too quiet, as if the world had stopped breathing. The other cars parked outside looked abandoned, coated with dust. He noticed the numbers on the doors, 1 through 8, then 10. No room 9 in sight. But the key in his hand said otherwise. He walked around the corner of the building and found a narrow corridor, one he hadn't noticed before, that led to a single door with a peeling metal 9 nailed crookedly into it. It was darker there, colder somehow. His phone had no signal. The key fit perfectly. Inside, the room was small and old but clean, a bed, a table, a faded TV from another decade. Everything smelled faintly of bleach and dust, yet something about it felt wrong, like the air was heavier here than outside. He dropped his bag, washed his face, and sat on the bed. That's when he noticed the sound. A soft knock, not at his door but behind the wall. It came again, slow, steady, like someone gently tapping from the other side. Daniel froze, his breath shallow. Then silence. He told himself it was just the pipes or the wind. But when he switched off the light, the air in the room seemed to shift, colder, almost damp. The smell of bleach deepened, sharp and chemical. He rolled over and tried to sleep. At 2:17 a.m., he woke to static. The old TV had turned on by itself, flickering with white noise. He reached for the remote, but before he could touch it, the static stopped, replaced by a faint image. It wasn't a channel. It was live footage, dark and grainy. The angle showed a hallway, this hallway with his door at the end. Room 9. The camera was fixed, unmoving, as if someone had set it up just outside. Daniel's heart pounded. He turned toward the window, no camera there, only endless black desert. He turned back to the screen, now the image had changed. It showed the inside of his room, the same bed, the same lamp, only he wasn't in the frame. He looked behind him, but the room was empty. When he turned back to the screen, the image flickered again, now showing a figure standing by the door. A man facing away, his skin pale under the static light. Daniel's stomach twisted. The figure turned slightly, and the face came into view. It was his own. Daniel leapt up, pulling the plug from the wall, plunging the room into silence. He grabbed his keys, his bag, and bolted for the door. But when he stepped out, the hallway wasn't there anymore. Instead, it opened into the same room again. The bed, the table, the TV unplugged, yet the screen still glowing faintly in the dark. He stumbled back, heart racing, every breath like fire. He yanked the door again, but the same thing, another room identical to his, stretching endlessly like a reflection in a mirror. Room after room, all marked with the same number, 9. He began to scream. No one heard him. When the sun rose over the desert the next morning, the Silver Star Motel was quiet as ever. The front desk was empty. The register hadn't been touched in years. Dust covered the counter. Room keys hung neatly behind, all except one, number 9. A few days later, a highway patrol officer stopped at the motel while searching for a missing hiker, Daniel. The officer found the place deserted, but noticed tire marks leading into the sand. He followed them for a few yards before they simply stopped, as if the car had vanished mid-turn. The officer later swore he saw something through the grimy window of room 9, just for a second. A man standing by the bed, watching a TV that wasn't plugged in. But when he looked again, the room was empty. The Silver Star still stands somewhere off Highway 89, though no one remembers when it last took a guest. Locals say if you pass that stretch at night, you might see the faint red glow of its vacancy sign flickering in the dark. But if you ever stop, if you ever get the key marked 9, you might never check out. Because some places aren't built for the living. They're built to keep what's already inside. If the thought of one cursed room gives you chills, don't wander too far, because the real horror isn't what we visit. It's what follows us home. If these tales kept you awake tonight, remember, truth leaves deeper scars than fiction. Like and subscribe before the lights go out, because next time, the story might be yours.